In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the concept of taking a percent of a number. And we're going to be taking this concept and building on it in the next sections as we talk about consumer math. So, the first thing we need to remember before we start this percent of a number concept is the word of. The word of is going to mean that we're going to use multiplication to figure out the answer. So let's just look at these four problems here to figure out the percent of a number that we're given. So what is 25% of $34? So you probably go shopping and you might see signs on the wall that say 25% off the ticket price. Well, this is asking, well, what is 25% of $34? And the way that you figure this out is like this. What is 25%? Well, anytime that you have a percent, you have to take that percent and you have to change it into a decimal. To do that, we started with this, 25%. We have to move it into a decimal by moving the decimal 2 times to the left, giving us that 0.25 or 25 hundredths. Now, this is going to be the decimal that we're going to use for the problem. So let's go ahead and take 25.25, and then the word of means multiply. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply that by the number that I'm given, which is $34. With this information, you can go ahead and just use your calculator and type in 25 hundredths times $34. And that's going to equal 8.5. So what does that mean? Let's look at this. If we want to know what 25% of $34 is, well, 25% of that whole number, $34, is going to be $8.50. So we don't like to leave our answer as 8.5. We're talking about terms of money here, so I'm going to actually go ahead and put a money symbol here, and I'm going to add my 0 for my hundredths place. So $8.50 is going to represent 25% of $34. Let's try another one. What is 70% of 120 people? So I have a group of 120 people, and I want to know what 70% of them. How many people is that? So let's go ahead and take our percentage, and let's go ahead and move it into a decimal. So I'm just going to go ahead and move it 1 space, 2 spaces to the left to give me my 0.70. Of is going to mean multiply. And 120 is going to be the number that I'm using. So here's the problem. I have 0.70 times 120. And I can go ahead and do that right in my calculator. And that's going to give me 84. Now, 84 what? Well, I started out with 120 people. So 70% of that 120 people are going to be 84 people. The next one is, what is 15% of 280 registered voters? So here we have a total, like a whole group of 280 voters, and I want to know what 15% of that is. So my 15% I'm going to change into 0.15. Of is going to mean multiply, and 280 is going to be the number that I'm going to multiply it by. So I'm going to have my 0.15 times my 280. And I'm going to go ahead to my calculator. 0.15 times 280 is going to equal 42. 42 what? Well, 42 registered voters. I'm just going to go ahead and write voters since I don't have a lot of space here. That's going to represent that 15% of the 280. And the last one, what is 110% of 50 points? If you've ever heard your coach say, well, give me 110%, that means they want better than your best, because your best would be 100%. So you can see that we want to know what 110% of 50 points is. So that's actually, we're going to end up with an answer that's a little bit more than 50 points. So let's look at our 110%. I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually going to rewrite this with some space in between, and I'm going to move the decimal once, twice. That's going to give me 1.10. My of is going to mean multiply, and then I have my 50 points. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply those numbers together, and you can do that right in your calculator. 1.10 times 50, that's going to give me 55 points. So that is how you find a percent of a number. Now we're going to take that application and we're actually going to do some other types of problems. So just as a little review about the idea and the concept behind the percent is basically that percent is a special type of ratio in which the denominator is 100. So when we look at this pizza here, we're talking about we have a whole pizza and then we take part of the pizza away. That's what we're talking about when we're dealing with percentages. We have a part of a whole. The part is going to be the small piece, and the whole is always going to be 100% of the pizza. That's where this little proportion comes into play. Now, if we looked at this particular pizza that we're given, you can see that the part that is being taken off is 2 slices. That's going to be represented in the numerator here of my ratio. And then the rest is going to be talking about the whole pizza itself. The whole pizza itself is going to represent 8 slices of pizza. So to figure out the percentage of the pizza that those 2 slices are, you would take your 2 divided by 8. And that would give you your percent over your 100. So it's kind of interesting. The question at the bottom here says, percentage of pizza taken from the whole. Well, let's go ahead and figure this out. If we were to simplify 2 divided by 8, well, 2 divided by 8 is going to simplify down to 1 over 4, which 1/4 will equal about 25%. So if we want to know what percentage of pizza was taken out, about 25% of the pizza was taken out of the whole. And basically that 1/4 is stating that's, hey, that's your percentage of pizza. So let's go ahead and use this concept of part and whole and apply it to these next couple of problems. I want you to take a look at this proportion up in the right-hand corner. It says percent over 100 is equal to is over of. Is represents a word that represents the word part, and of represents the word for whole. So part over the whole. I'm going to go ahead and put a little note there for you. This is the part, and this is the whole. Now let's go ahead and set up a proportion and solve these problems. Let me show you how this works. It says 10% of what number is 70? So again, I'm just trying to find the percent of a number. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use this little ratio to help me. So 10% of what number? We're looking for what number? So let's figure this out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by setting up a proportion. I'm always going to begin my proportion by placing my 100 in the 100 location, which is the bottom left corner. Then what I'm always going to do next is I'm going to look at my question and see, do they give me a percentage? And in our case, they do. They give me 10%. So I'm going to go ahead and place it in the position where I have a percentage. Now this is where the part gets a little bit tricky. See how I have an is and an of? Take a look here. My sentence says of what number? When you see of what number, we don't know what number, right? And when you don't know the number in math, we always use a variable. So I'm going to put a variable where in the placement of the proportion where we put an of. Then it states is 70. Is 70 is going to represent the part. So I'm going to place that in the is or the part section of my proportion. Now that I have everything placed in its location, I'm going to go ahead and solve the proportion just like we've been doing this unit. I'm going to go ahead and multiply my cross products. And I'm going to get 10x is equal to 70 times 100. And I'm just going to go ahead and simply solve this out. 10x is equal to 7,000. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide both sides by 10 to give me x is equal to 700. Now, what that means is this. It's asking me 10% of what number is 70? Well, 10% of 700 will give you 70. See how we did that? Let's try another one. Let's go ahead and set up our proportion to begin with. I always set it up and I always put my 100 in his location. Then it says then what I need to do is figure out, is there a percentage in the problem? our case, it says, what percent of 200 is 15? Well, you see here that it says what percent. We don't know what percent, so that's going to represent our x. So I'm going to go ahead and put an x in my percent location. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill in the other blanks. Of 200, that's going to be our whole. So of 200 represents the whole, which is going to be here. And then is 15 is going to represent our part, which I'm going to place in this location. At this point, I have a proportion, and I can go ahead and use my cross products to solve for my variable. So I have 200x is equal to 15 times 100. All right, let's go ahead and simplify this down now. I have 200x is equal to 1500. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide it by 200 to eliminate, to figure out what that variable is. And in my case, our variable is going to be 7.5. Okay. Now looking at our answer here, let's talk about what it actually means. So we have an answer of x is equal to 7.5, but remember what the question asked. The question asked, what percent of 200 is 15? So, and since the percent represents our variable, your answer is actually going to be the percentage. So the percentage will be 7.5%. So 7.5% of 200 is 15. Okay, I've got two more here for you. Let's do the same thing. Let's go ahead and set up our proportion first. I'm going to start my proportion by placing my 100 in its proper location. And then I'm going to search to see if there's a percentage in the problem, which there is. We have a 60%. So I'm going to go ahead and pop him right into place. Now I'm going to go ahead and figure out where the other numbers go. I have 45 is. 45 is going to be the part, and it's going to be represented by our is in our proportion. So I'm going to place a 45 there. And then of what number? Well, we don't know what number, so I'm going to place an x in the whole position, the of position. Now that I have my proportion, I'm going to go ahead and solve. I'm going to set it up as 60 times x is equal to 100 times 45. And I can go ahead and use my calculator there to figure out the rest of this problem. So I have 60x is equal to 4,500. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to divide both sides by 60. In our case, x is going to equal 75. Now let's go back up to the problem and read it again. 45 is 60% of 75. All right, I've got one more for you. Feel free to pause the video and try this one on your own if you'd like. What is 74% of 650? I'm going to start by setting up my proportion, and I'm going to go ahead and put the 100 in its position, and then I'm going to search if there's any percentages in the problem, which there is. I have a 74%, so I'm going to go ahead and pop him into the percent location. Okay, what is, well, isn't that the part? Isn't that going to be the variable? So we're going to put the variable in the is position of 650. That's going to be our whole. So we're going to put it in the whole position. Once we have our proportion, go ahead and solve. So we have 100x is equal to 74 times 650. Excuse me. And be sure to use your calculator just to double check your multiplication on these numbers, just to make sure that your numbers are going to match up. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide it by 100 to finish off the problem. So x is going to equal 481. So basically it says, what is 74% of 650? Well, 481 is 74% of 650. So that is the number. All right, that brings us to the end of our lesson on percent of a number, which is going to lead us right into our next section of consumer math.